Slums capture the imagination of architects, designers, and city planners all over the world because they create new and exciting urban forms as well as presenting serious challenges to be solved. It would seem that urbanists have an important role in taking on these challenges. However, their involvement in slums can be harmful to the slum residents themselves. This paper explores the irresponsible ways in which urban professionals interact with slums and suggests other more ethical approaches. We became interested in this subject because of our personal experiences working with this issue. As an architecture student, I researched extensively in one of Delhi's leprosy colonies with the objective of producing a design solution to improve the residents' life. Although my project approached the issue from a design perspective, the built environment was not really one of their top concerns. Their actual concerns were the lack of infrastructure, education, chronic unemployment, and social discrimination, and mainly rooted in social and economic inequality. And my proposed redesign intervention brought me acclaim in the architectural fraternity. I got an award, I got into graduate school. My clients received none of the actual benefits in return for their contributions.
I'm Zoe Roller. I worked as an NGO project manager in Rio de Janeiro's informal settlements, which are called favelas. I worked on environmental projects there and spent a lot of time in the field, so I had lots of contacts and connections with the people in the communities. Because of my networks, I was often contacted by researchers and urban practitioners who were seeking access to favelas to experiment with interventions like water filtration systems, biodigesters, and green walls. The people that got in touch with me were usually Europeans or Americans affiliated with architecture firms and universities. The first few times people contacted me, I was excited to show them around because the areas where I worked really needed infrastructure projects, and I thought their skills and resources could make that happen. So I would introduce them to my local contacts and set up meetings and do whatever I could to bring the projects to the neighborhood. But the projects rarely got implemented. After spending time in the neighborhood and talking to locals, these practitioners would get too busy, or they underestimated costs, or they were deterred by obstacles. Some were just gathering material for their dissertations and didn't intend to build anything. I started to see my interactions with them as ethically questionable. Each new proposal created expectations among the residents, who had to pin their hopes on the whims of outsiders because they were neglected by their own government. Projects that were built didn't account for the burden of maintenance. They just assumed that residents would maintain the new infrastructure in all their spare time, just as they had freely given their time to interviews. Like Yasir, I benefited from my complicity in this phenomenon in academic settings, where working in slums is a surefire way to get recognition. These experiences made us think critically about the role of professionally trained architects, urban designers, and planners in slums. We began to notice the urge to address poverty through design everywhere, particularly in the glossy renderings of cutting-edge architecture in the middle of developing world slums that fill exhibitions, university classrooms, and design portfolios. The slums appear as a colorful backdrop, with smiling local faces suggesting complete approval of the project. In a gallery, these renderings can look like promising solutions to the wicked problems of informality and disinvestment. But people in the famous slums these projects represent, like Dharavi, Paraisopoulos, or Kibera, would be hard-pressed to find a trace of them on the ground. Using attractive renderings to propose design-based solutions to service issues in slums has become a common practice, but the proposals are rarely built, and when they are, they have the potential to do more damage than the problems they attempt to solve. This critique is not meant to suggest that design has no role in improving life in slums, or that research on these communities only yields harmful results. It is important that practitioners leverage their resources, social capital, and authority to address the challenges of slums. But design is not supreme, and treating design as a panacea obscures the complex policies, histories, and structural inequalities that shape slums and keep residents in poverty.
These sexy renderings are more than just illustrations. They're mechanisms to convert urban informality into romanticized cultural capital, supported by conferences, competitions, universities, and the favorite term of contemporary urbanism, labs. The cachet around the slum boosts both individual and organizational reputations, attracting employers and donors. Architects, planners, universities often partner with local slum organizations. They conduct research on the built environment and propose interventions inspired by the challenges and opportunities that they identify. Meanwhile, the slum residents, the creators of these inspiring structures and settlements, rarely share in the benefits that these proposals produce. They merely shoulder the research burden and end up empty handed. We mapped out the institutions that support and encourage such a system of design interventions in order to trace out the flow of tangible and intangible benefits. At the very top comes philanthropy, international and government aid, international agencies, and corporations. These provide the input capital for universities, urban labs, competition and design challenges, and architecture and design firms. The input capital trickles down to students and researchers, and then to practitioners, and some of it ends up going into exhibitions. And finally, where do the slums fit into all of this? All this money is flowing down through these actors, but by the time it gets to the slum, there's not much funding left for implementation. However, intangible benefits do come out of the slums and flow back up to the practitioners and institutions. This can take many forms. Academics publish papers that further their careers, architects and designers gain credibility by having slum designs in their portfolios, and corporate sponsors of exhibitions and projects improve their public image. Anyone involved in working with slums is seen as having integrity and legitimacy. Architects that work on slums gain a reputation of being altruistic and sacrificing profit-driven projects. Slum residents themselves don't get to share in that prestige that the environment generates for the practitioners.
The ultimate output of most of this work is the design exhibition, or what one critic calls Save the World with Architecture exhibitions. Making slums into a trendy aesthetic glosses over the conditions that constrain people to ramshackle houses. A fair amount has been written about the staging of poverty in film and charitable campaigns, but there is less critical focus on how designers participate in the same process of aestheticizing poverty and capitalizing on its glamour. As this image shows, some exhibitions even use artifacts from the slums to give viewers the sensation of actually being there. But as one critic points out, the work shown will be the inspiration not for specific action on the ground, but for stylistic speculation, a tool the rich and their architects use to make their lives more flavorful and cool. There are several problems with this approach. First of all, poverty in itself is not a design problem, and these challenges cannot be solved through design alone. A new construction style may improve the quality of life, but it does not address gentrification or rising costs in a slum. Disparities are rooted in centuries-old histories of exploitation, and addressing them demands the kind of funding, organization, and commitment that only governments can furnish. But philanthropy and aid money still pours into competitions or projects that frame poverty and informality as mere design problems. The results are generally poorly researched, impractical ideas that ignore systemic issues and the wishes of the people they are designed for. As one critic says, arrogance, reinforced by market forces, can isolate architects from both people and context. Too much focus on design can lead practitioners to lose touch with reality and make impractical suggestions. For example, the poo pot was presented by designers as an innovative new solution to sanitation problems, but it is basically a more simple version of the bucket toilet, which is recognized as unsanitary. Another issue with toilet designs is that they generally fail to address the gender issues that make accessing toilets difficult. In another example, many designers propose building with shipping containers as a solution for housing problems in slums. Never mind that retrofitting containers to be habitable shelters would likely cost more than the readily available materials like brick and cement. Even if shipping container skyscrapers were a valid construction method, the fact remains that slum residents already have decades of experience in housing construction. Substandard housing in slums is due to unemployment and poverty, not a dearth of materials. Another major contributor to the slum design mindset is the tendency to view cities as experimental spaces, where new ideas can be tested and tweaked. This is especially true in developing world cities and slums, where the lack of zoning and regulation inspires practitioners seeking innovation. Much like the tendency to see urban crises as design problems, treating cities as labs is ethically dubious when it addresses impoverished communities like slums, as it bypasses informed consent of residents. While many urban labs are no doubt motivated by the genuine freedom to experiment that slums offer, the potential for carelessness is high. Casting slums as labs creates a dehumanizing power dynamic, especially since these experiments are usually carried out in neighborhoods, cities, or even continents far away from the experimenter's home. The presumed power gained through the positionality of being a trained professional also grants the experimenter immunity from the repercussions of failed experiments. Thinking of the city as a lab means that mistakes are acceptable outcomes. When experiments go wrong, practitioners can retreat to another city and try again with a clean slate, leaving behind those who were directly affected. In order to work in slums in a responsible way, practitioners must examine power dynamics. Laura Nader insightfully argues that it is generally easier to study down, that is, to study those with less power than ourselves. This pattern can distort research ethics. Researchers and practitioners involved in slum design easily assume informed consent, that is, that slum residents have knowledge of the possible consequences and time commitment of participating, and that they were not coerced or intimidated. Nader proposes that we study up and sideways as well as down. She says, studying up as well as down would lead us to ask many common sense questions in reverse. Instead of asking why some people are so poor, we would ask, why are other people so affluent? How has it come to be, we might ask, that anthropologists are more interested in why peasants don't change than why the auto industry doesn't innovate, or why the Pentagon and universities cannot be more organizationally creative? As we conducted this research, we also looked for examples of ethical engagements with slum communities. Innovative design has enormous potential to improve the lives of slum residents and encourage sustainable practices, but it will only be realized when the work of slum residents themselves receives the same level of recognition and funding that outsiders currently enjoy. When the cultural capital created by slums enriches their residents rather than being siphoned away. In an era when slum residents are regularly killed, criminalized, excluded, and treated as less than human, it is crucial that privileged practitioners lift up endogenous projects and share their access and resources. These are some successful approaches to slum design challenges. The Makoko Floating School in Lagos, Nigeria, makes a compelling case for working closely with slums and governments. Although it resembles the impractical renderings we criticize in this paper, it was actually built and maintained, and it's now setting an example for government policy. An example of a successful partnership between slum residents and outsiders is the newly launched Nós por Nós, an app developed by youth members of the organization Fórum de Juventudes do Rio de Janeiro, that allows users to anonymously send videos of police brutality to human rights officials. The development of the app was supported by the Ford Foundation, Witness, and Amnesty International, demonstrating that international organizations and funders can support endogenous designs rather than try to supplant them. Slum designs can also influence policy to create more widespread change. The architecture firm Urban Think Tank lobbied Hugo Chávez's government to build cable cars for a slum in Caracas, instead of simply designing the cable cars. They acknowledged that political action must be taken to ensure that their designs are built.
Moving forward, we are asking for a consciousness of ethical research and design methods that prevent a fetishization of poverty, minimize respondent burden, and ensure equitable distribution of gains from the project. The adaptation of ethical research principles prescribed for public health research could serve as a starting point. We are asking donors to such projects to demand results that can, in reality, change the lives of people and are more than just showcase materials for their efforts. Follow-ups and program reevaluations to assess the results of such projects are critical, even though these may not reveal the expected outcomes. A common goal of such projects should be to establish methods for capacity building in these communities, such that they are able to design for their future and maintain the implemented designs.